Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Hope you have been well, guys. Welcome to my room. I just wanted to pursue some thoughts on the question of, valuing what types or what properties of types according to what criteria. Um, I started looking at this question in my video about sensors, which is the last video I made, I believe, where I was addressing the anti-sensor bias that we observe in the MBTI community, and I was attempting to explain, in that video I was attempting to explain this bias in terms of mostly two things. A need for identification, a need for setting out and demarcating your identity, and the domination of intuitives in MBTI communities. Because if there's a majority of intuitives, the identification methods are going to be the ones deployed by an intuitive type. You demarcate yourself principally against what you're not, S types, and so one attempt to demarcate in this way is to devalue, the intelligence or depth of S types or anything like that. But thinking a bit further about it, it really seems to me that when you consider the matter from a really, really wide perspective, it's always a matter of who decides what the standards are. Sometimes the standards are implicit, sometimes the standards are explicit. For very big communities, slightly impersonal communities that sort of spread across continents, these tend to be impersonal or implicit. But the fact that they're implicit doesn't mean that they are transcendental, that they are there and that they exist objectively in the world somehow. At the end of the day, the standards of what constitutes value, in a person is always defined by people. It's defined by people. This could also have to do with some of the philosophical positions I hold, but I don't believe in like a transcendental metaphysical standard that defines what constitutes an ethical action, what constitutes a good person, what constitutes a valuable person, or whatever. It's always something that should be the result of a convention, more or less explicitly accepted by the members of the community. Now, if you look at the MBTI community and it's being dominated by intuitives, what you get is criteria, implicit criteria, or what makes a person worthwhile, that is dictated by intuitives. And so the criteria are going to be things like curiosity, openness, depth, and IQ or something like that. But it's one of the points I was making in my video is that it's not as if the sensors that are members of MBTI communities agree to these things and are like, I wish I were an intuitive because I do not have those features as much or whatever, which primarily, first of all, is not obvious. It's maybe statistically more likely, but it's especially in terms of IQ, according to some studies, intuitives on average have probably higher IQ, but they will have their own sensor communities within the MBTI community, and they will have their own perspective, and they will also find things about intuitives that are failing in some way, such as not having a clue, or not being able to navigate in the real world, being an armchair kind of, armchair philosopher, or something like that. So there's something that Jordan Peterson said in one of his videos, and although not agreeing with him on all things, far from it, I thought that was quite an interesting quote. He said, it's very annoying to people. It can be very annoying to people who have an IQ of 160 that they can also be completely useless. But it happens a lot, and so there is something here, that I think probably speaks again to this process of identification, and what can you find in people who probably in some way make you feel inferior, or this person knows how to navigate the world and they're someone much better at certain things, and it becomes easier to denigrate them because for being less smart or less deep, because it's a process of self-defense in a way, and reevaluating yourself through denigrating them. So these processes happen. They're not specific to intuitives, they're not specific to sensors, they're not specific to any particular community. But as long as there are communities in the world, communities of like members, these communities will have certain standards, again, often implicit, which they have themselves defined, which they can use to reinforce their sense of identity as part of a community. And it's reassuring for members of that community, because in identifying with a community that in itself has a strong identity, they can reinforce their own individual sense of identity. And that happens at the level of the MBTI community, let's say the community of intuitives, but it happens in all, sectors of life, really. It happens in, if you look at a community of academics, or if you look at a community of, specialists in like media and communications, or specialists in human resources, will consider themselves like logistically, able, and will tend to see others as not as logistically able. It's a way for them to strengthen their sense of identity as well. If you are pursuing an occupation, you will tend to look at your strengths, and you will tend to look at your weaknesses as well. But when you look at people from other occupation, you will tend to look for what distinguishes you from them, and in the process of maintenance of self-worth, you will tend to also see why you made that choice, why it's a good choice, and what allows you to be better in what fields. And so whenever it looks like there is something like an objective state of affairs where yes, it's obvious sensors are less smart, are less deep, or whatever. Whenever there's something that looks objective like this, that looks like it's not just defined by people, that it's actually something like immaterial and timeless, something that cannot really be discussed, rather than something man-made or woman-made, well, usually it's only a symptom of the fact that the community in question is vastly the majority in a total population. And it's so much more like it looks so much like the majority that it's so much the majority that it looks as if its criteria are the timeless eternal criteria, but they're not. It's only a symptom of it being a very, very big majority. And again, you can apply that to a lot of things. You can apply that to a lot of things in the political domain, in the cultural domain, in the social domain, and I think we can all learn from this process. But remember, values are created. They don't come dropping from the sky in a timeless fashion. All right, see you soon, guys. Hope these reflections were useful. Ciao. And I'll hopefully make a video by the end of the week.